So relatable is you need the audience to understand you're just like them. I've had the same problem you've had, but you also have to establish your authority. I've had that problem and I solved that problem. And then you have to demonstrate your purpose. And the reason I'm here today is to help people just like you so that we don't have this problem anymore. If you can accomplish those three things in the first 5 minutes of your presentations, you're off to a really good start.
Welcome to the podcast about communication in business. I'm your host, George Torok. Did you know that I'm known as the speech coach for executives? Because I help business leaders deliver the intended message for greater success. And we do that through one-on-one coaching or group training for the team. On this podcast, you will hear communication insights and perspectives from experts from around the world. My guest today is Danny Brassel. Here's 3 facts that I think you should know about Danny. 1, he's delivered over 3,500 presentations across 4 continents, helping professionals from Fortune 500 executives to kindergarten teachers communicate their message with clarity, confidence, and impact. 2, he co-founded the Well-Crafted Story Workshop, where they train entrepreneurs and business leaders to turn personal experiences into powerful presentations that convert audiences into clients. And 3, he believes laughter opens more doors than logic. Whether he's keynoting a conference or coaching a client, he uses humor and heart to make the message stick and the journey unforgettable. My guest today, Danny Brassel. Danny, welcome to Your Intended Message.
Thanks so much for that kind introduction, George. You're hired. I'm bringing you on the road with me. And I really appreciate you inviting me to be on this podcast. We had a great discussion off air about you're not having me because you're not Hannibal Lecter. You invited me. So I appreciate you, my friend. Words matter.
And yes, and words matter to both of us. And we're both good students of the subject. And it's ongoing. And actually, you point out, you make a good point there, is that we're never finished learning. And there are too many individuals out there who think, oh, I'm a great communicator. Well, maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe you're simply ignoring your flaws. Danny, one of the powerful ways to communicate a message is by wrapping it around a story. And how do you suggest, so people have got a message they want to get out, where do they start?
Well, you could start with the Bible. I mean, it's biblical. If you look at reading the Bible, it always cracks me up. Jesus is always getting frustrated with his apostles. He's like, all right, let me give you a story about it. So there's these 2 sons. One of them's a prodigal son, or here's David and Goliath and things like that. I was just pointing this out before I was joining you. I was on a Christian podcast, and I bet you 9 out of 10 Christians cannot name the 10 commandments. And the reason is they're presented as a list. They're not presented as a story. People remember stories. They forget bullet points. That's why your PowerPoint is fairly useless unless you're using images. And so here's an exercise everybody in your audience can do. Later on, sit in a comfortable chair with a pen and paper, a libation of choice. And for about an hour, I want you to write down every story that's ever happened to you. And I don't mean the entire story. I just mean triggers, like the time I locked myself out of the car in front of Costco, the time Dad spilt mustard on his tie at that fancy restaurant. You'll find in an hour you can come up with probably 500 stories, little triggers like this. So that's the first part of the exercise. The second part of the exercise is then I want you to think about, well, what's this story really about? Oh, this is a story about never giving up. Oh, this is a story about being trustworthy. Oh, this is a story about love. And if you were to look at my computer, I have hundreds of files with probably thousands, if not tens of thousands of stories. So when I'm speaking to an audience and I need story, I mean, some people collect cars, some people collect stamps. I collect stories. I always have an anecdote for everything. And really one of the things I'm teaching my clients is how to use a story to get your audience to take the action that you want them to take. So for an example, I was working with a woman recently, and at the end of her talk, she didn't know how to end her talk. She had a call to action, but she didn't have a very compelling close to get people to remember her. And I said, well, what do you want your audience to do? And she said, Well, I want them to understand they can't do it on their own. I'm like, oh, you need to hire an expert story. She's like, yes, I need to hire an expert story. I'm like, okay, well, let me demonstrate it for you. I'll leave you with this. Many years ago, my wife and I had theater tickets. So we were dressed to the nines, driving to the theater. And as we drove, we got a flat tire. And my wife said, I'm going to call AAA, get a tow truck here. I'm like, you don't have to call AAA. I'm a man. I can fix a flat tire. So I opened up the trunk. I got the spare tire. I got the pumper thingy and the big jack thing that you unscrew nuts with. Long story short, 27 minutes later, I had grease all over me. I'm filthy. I haven't done anything to fix this dang flat tire. My wife is shaking her head like I could have done so much better than this guy. And unbeknownst to me, George, she had actually called AAA. This tow truck appears and some 17-year-old punk hops out of the tow truck and in 3 minutes flat fixes the flat tire. You know, I think there are times in life when all of us think we can do it ourselves. But if you want to save time, you want to save money, and you want to save a whole lot of embarrassment and heartache, you hire an expert. So that's the power of using a story to demonstrate a point without hitting the nail on the head, showing people exactly what you want to do. Illustrate it with a story.
And there's some reasons why that story works so well. One, it's you not being the hero, but being the object of, I don't want to say shame, but you're making fun of yourself. You're making yourself be the fool. So no one else is offended because it's you that they're laughing at. However, and you made it visual because you described yourself. You know, you're going out to this fancy place. You're dressed in the nines, and then you started. And then the phrase, "Well, I can change the tire. I'm a man." So that's going to trigger an emotional connection with certainly men and women.
Yeah.
Who go, oh yeah, I know the type. Yeah.
Yes. And that's what you're trying to do. A lot of people, they want me to help them infuse humor into their talks. And you already hit upon it, George. Is the best way, especially in today's easily offended society, the best way to utilize humor is always to poke fun at yourself. I'll give you an example. When I first started speaking, most of my audiences, and this is what I always tell people, is the riches are in the niches. Your audience, the easiest way to start is with an audience that you're comfortable with. So if you are a stay-at-home mom, start by speaking to stay-at-home moms. And you can expand your audience. I've expanded my audience fourfold since I started. But I was a teacher. I felt very comfortable with teachers, and so I was training teachers. And I was at a reading conference, and I had a speech where I said, some kids don't like to have books. So they don't like to read books. So make sure you have magazines. Make sure you have newspapers. Heck, you got a bunch of fat kids, give them menus. They'll read those. Well, 3 obese teachers were offended by that statement. So I used the same line, George, but I'm showing you how to make humor universal. You already hit upon it. Some kids don't like to read books. So make sure you have magazines. Make sure you have newspapers. Heck, when I was a kid, only thing I like to do was eat. You got a kid like that? Give him a menu. You hit it right there. People always can laugh at it when you're putting it on yourself. So that's an easy humor tip. I just broke my rule. I said humor tip. I give tips to waiters. I give strategies to people on how to be better at speaking.
Good clarification of the word tips. Yeah. Yes. Good. And yes, it's the humor is acceptable when you talk about you were the one who just liked to eat and therefore just give a kid like that a menu. So so you're part of it. And that reminds me of the old advice is that when you talk to start your speech with a lawyer joke. Well, if you're talking to lawyers and you're not a lawyer, you can't tell a lawyer joke.
Absolutely right.
And I'm reminded, and there's this on the story, and you're right, the stories can come from many parts of our life, and our personal stories are powerful because it's our story. We relive it as we tell it. Here's one example of a story that I haven't used enough, but it goes back to when my kids were playing soccer. When they were little, they played soccer, and at this time I was at my youngest daughter's game, and I enjoyed watching the game. And I ran into a colleague there, and then we realized both our kids were on the opposing teams. And he says to me, George, which one is yours? And I point towards the field and I say, the one with the ponytail. And he starts laughing. I'm thinking, what are you laughing about? He says, George, they all have ponytails.
I love that story. What I love about it, George, and this is a big mistake a lot of people make. They think they have to have extraordinary stories. I'm working with a gentleman right now from Saudi Arabia. He's climbed the highest peak on all 7 continents. He did the Iditarod to the North Pole. He swam with sharks in Madagascar. I look at him, I'm like, nobody can relate to you. There's nobody in your audience probably that's climbed Mount Everest. But everybody in your audience peed their pants when they were 6 years old. That is a good story because that's what you're trying to do more than anything when you're on stage is how do I relate to my audience? I always say this when you're at the beginning of your talk, and you and I both know that's the most important part of your talk because that's when your audience has decided, am I going to be present for this presentation or am I going to be engaged? And so the way you connect with your audience, my co-partner, Coach Jimmy Hayes Nelson, he calls it the 3 gotta's, and I'm a former school teacher. So I always have to make things either rhyme or be alliterative. And so I say, you got to rap. You got to show that you're relatable. You got to demonstrate your authority and you have to clearly show your purpose. So relatable is you need the audience to understand you're just like them. I've had the same problem you've had, but you also have to establish your authority. I've had that problem and I solved that problem. And then you have to demonstrate your purpose. And the reason I'm here today is to help people just like you so that we don't have this problem anymore. If you can accomplish those 3 things in the first 5 minutes of your presentations, you're off to a really good start.
Relatable, authority, and purpose. And authority simply means that you've experienced this problem and here's how you dealt with it, or here's how you learn from someone else how to deal with it.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Brene Brown. She has a talk about vulnerability, and I completely agree with her. One of the biggest mistakes I see people make in presentations is they love to brag to establish that they're the expert. I always say do exactly the opposite. Stop talking about your successes. Start talking about your failures because not everybody in your audience has succeeded, but they've all failed. And the more you share your own failures, the more that your audience is going to see themselves in you, and they're going to walk with you on that journey as you take them through your stories. They're going to see themselves in those stories. They're going to see themselves wanting to work with you, take that next step. And that's really the only way I measure an effective presentation. If somebody tells me I got a standing ovation, I'm like, that's great. Somebody tells me people think I'm a great speaker. I'm like, that's great. But if you're working with me, the only way we're measuring your effectiveness is how many people in your audience decide to take the next step with you. So that could be an unpaid next step, like subscribe to my podcast or book a complimentary consultation call. It can be a paid offer, like buy my product or invest in my coaching program. But this is what we're looking at is we don't want to just move hearts. We also want to move the needle. Your success is my success. The only way you're succeeding, the only way you can actually affect a lot more people is if you're making some money at it. And there's nothing wrong with making money.
What about leaders in a company talking to their staff? Mm-hmm. Do you recommend that they include at least one story in every meeting or what? How do they go about that?
You know, it was great. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Lincoln. They say it's based on the book Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin, which it's only based on 4 pages of that book, and the book does a better job with it. But President Lincoln, when he was a country lawyer in Illinois, they say that people would come from 20 miles around just to go to the inn where he'd be telling stories by the fire. And during the darkest days of the Civil War, his cabinet, he would always start off with a story to kind of loosen the mood. And so in the movie, there's a great moment where it's a tense time and Lincoln starts to tell a story and the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton's like, no, don't tell a story. And of course, Lincoln ignores him and he says, the story he tells is, when the founding fathers were around, Ethan Allen was named an ambassador to England. And he was with some British soldiers one night and they thought they'd have some fun with him. So in the outhouse latrine, they posted a picture of George Washington. And so they're playing cards and they're eagerly waiting for Ethan Allen to have to do his business. And he finally does. And he comes back and all the British officers are snickering and they sit and Ethan Allen has no response. And they say, didn't you see the picture of George Washington in the latrine? He said, why, yes. And they said, did it not offend you? He said, why, no. Every American knows that the sight of George Washington scares the crap out of the British. How do you not love this man? That's how you tell a story. And I say that I was just working with a CEO in New York, and it was interesting because his challenge is he's inherited the role. It's a family-run company. He's about 35 years old. So most of his team, these are more experienced people, 50s, some in their 60s. And so what he had to do was come up with a story about why he was qualified to be there. And so what he did is he basically creates this story about a time when he felt in over his head. And what he did is he relied on the expertise of the people around him. And so basically it's edifying everybody in the room, saying, hey, I know I don't have the experience that you all have, but I also have the experience of getting people to work together. It was a really good story. And so we've encouraged him to really continue telling stories like that. So I always encourage people to, I'm a little bit different than a lot of people. Coach Jimmy and I, and one of the reasons we started our company, George, was we were training people for one of the biggest speaking companies on the planet. What we would do is this company would charge executives $15,000 for a 2-day training with us, where we would train about 50 of them together. And there was a couple of problems with that. First of all, you're in a room with people from like lots of different industries. So we couldn't be very specific to your industry and exactly understanding your audience and your problems. And the bigger problem, George, was I'm not a big believer in 1-day or 2-day trainings. I don't think you ever master anything just being exposed to it once. You have to be exposed to it again and again. And the problem we saw happening was the company, they were satisfied. Oh, they got their money. I mean, 50 times $15,000? That's a pretty good day, about $750,000. But they didn't care about the after effects of that. And so some of the people we had worked with, they would keep in touch. And one gentleman was telling us that he was giving his speech and his audience loved the presentation, but none of them were booking appointments with him. And so Jimmy and I said, well, send your speech to us. We'll watch it. We watched him give the speech. We're like, oh, we got it immediately. I'm like, okay, you have the right elements, but you're not putting them in the right places like we taught you. He just made that one little adjustment. He's now booked. He has appointments booked through the end of the calendar year, and he's just so grateful. And Coach Jimmy, he says that he's a speech chiropractor. I'm like, oh, that's a good way of saying it. He is a speech chiropractor. It's nice being able to work with him because our other part founder is Dave Ward. I call us the professor, the performer, and the producer because my background is in academia. Coach Jimmy was an actor on Broadway, and Dave Ward, he was an attorney, and he's masterful with contracts and law and artificial intelligence. And it's great. We all have our own strengths and we bring a lot to the team. I'm wandering right now, but I think the other thing that separates me from a lot of these coaches, one of the problems I had with the way this company was training people is they said, what we're doing is we're teaching you how to create what we call a well-crafted story. Some people call it a signature talk. I was a reporter 30 years ago covering President Bush Sr. in the 92 election, and he used to give the same speech again and again 20 times a day. He called it his stump speech, which I could recite it better than him after listening to it 20 times a day. Superhero movies, they call it the origin story. You can call it peanut butter and jelly. It doesn't matter what you call it. But this is a story, a presentation that you're going to create that's going to introduce yourself to new audiences. And this company was really encouraging people to talk about a traumatic moment of your life. Well, there's 3 reasons why I refuse to do that, George. First of all, the world just survived a global pandemic. Everybody's had a lot of bad stuff happen to them. I don't think we need another sad story. I think we need more stories of hope. Second of all, this is a talk you're going to deliver again and again. Do you really want to talk about a traumatic event in your life again and again? I mean, I have a friend, his daughter was killed in a school shooting. He's delivered that speech over 1,000 times. You got to be a lot stronger than me to talk about the worst day of your life. And third, and this is where people get angry with me, I have one objective when I'm on stage. I want you to leave feeling better than when you came in. I want you laughing, smiling, happy. I think there's something admirable about that as a goal. I believe the people that tell the same sad story again and again, by the 20th time they're telling it, now those are crocodile tears and now you're being manipulative. And I'm not saying it's not an effective sales strategy. It's actually a very effective sales strategy. But I personally don't want to have to take a shower after I get off stage because I just manipulated my audience. There are actually ethical ways to get people to want to do business with you. And, I love humor as a tool to unite people. And I just think, and I'm not saying you can't tell sad stories, but if you do tell a sad story, please make sure there's a happy ending. We need to provide the audience with some hope because the people in your audience, they have a problem. And that's what you should be thinking about when you're on stage. My audience is dying. I have the antidote. And if they don't get my antidote, they are going to die. When you think about it that way, I'm here to serve my audience, not to sell my audience. It totally changes your mindset and what you're going to accomplish on stage.
Sad stories. You said it's okay to tell a sad story as long as it doesn't become something you tell every day.
Well, as long as there's a happy ending. I mean, it's one thing if you survived cancer. It's another thing is if you're telling your audience, I still have cancer. I've got about 3 months to live. Well, that makes everybody really uncomfortable. They're like, I don't know. I want, it's the same reason I watch American movies instead of French films. I know in an American movie, if Julia Roberts dies in the middle of the movie, by the end of the movie, they're going to resuscitate her and she'll be alive. If she dies in a French movie, I look at my wife, I'm like, I think she's actually dead. This is a really downer movie. Life's too short. I'm here to smile and enjoy myself. Again, I've heard lots of uplifting tales about, somebody overcoming a really difficult type of adversity. Matter of fact, a lot of the people that you and I are serving, these are entrepreneurs that are struggling. And some of the best speakers I watch are people that are now successful. I mean, the book, probably one of the books that changed my life was Against All Odds by James Dyson. James Dyson just went through the ringer for 15 years trying to get his vacuums for sale, the Dyson vacuum. And the happy ending is even after 5,200 prototypes and all kinds of no's and lawsuits and people stealing his patents and things, now he's Sir James Dyson. I believe he's the second wealthiest person in England. He's got a he's just amazing to me. But what's compelling about his story is the struggles. And you see that. And I was at an event recently and two of the speakers, they said two things that irritated me. First, they said, enjoy the journey. And I looked at my audience. I'm like, what kind of advice is enjoy the journey? When you're starving to death and can't pay your rent, are you saying, you know what? I'm really enjoying this journey. This is a lot of fun. There's nothing fun about the journey. You can't enjoy the journey. And then the other thing that annoyed me is they considered themselves thought leaders. And so I asked my audience, raise your hand if you need another thought. I'm a results leader. I'll provide a result for you. How many of you need results? And this is where I get along with you, George, is you and I see the power in words. Words absolutely matter. And so it's really important, especially with the people that we're serving. How do you identify yourself? How are you portraying yourself to the rest of the world? This is very important because once you understand and have a clear idea of who your audience is and what your mission is, then you'll be able to serve masses.
And you remind me of a great storyteller, Stephen King. I was looking at his book again, the one called On Writing. And before I read that book, when I thought, Stephen King, I wish I was Stephen King. And then I'm reading the book of how much he struggled early in his life. And I'm thinking, I'm sure glad I'm not Stephen King.
Abject poverty. My goodness. Yeah. Unbelievable what he had to. I mean, yeah, it'd be great to live the later half of Stephen King's life. But that first, it's what I work with a lot of politicians on their speeches. And I always give them a hard time. Like, you ever notice most politicians never grew up middle class? They all grew up poor. I was born in a log cabin. You have to show the struggle. People need to see the struggle.
And when someone says to you, here's the standard response. Danny, I don't have any stories. I don't remember anything. And people don't want to listen to they want to listen to about me. What do you say to that?
Well, first of all of us have stories. And I do have people that are difficult like that every now and then. But if they just completely insist they have no stories, which usually I'm pretty good about mining those stories out of them. But if they are just completely difficult, I always point them to the personal development section of the bookstore. And I say, if you look at one of the most successful personal development books of all time, it's called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, in which he shares no personal stories. What he did is he interviewed a whole bunch of millionaires and told their stories. So if you have no stories of your own, which is complete garbage, everybody has stories of their own. But if you don't feel like sharing those stories, then, figure out the masters in your field and tell those stories. I actually already modeled it for you. I had a good President Lincoln story that I shared with you. People remember the stories, though. And this is why I'm such an avid reader, is I'm constantly looking for those stories. I just read a marketing book, which was a horrible book. I wasn't interested in it at all. But there was one little anecdote in there which made it worth the entire experience. The guy was basically going around the world trying to figure out what's the next best thing to market. And he was in Chile watching these fishermen fish, and he noticed they caught one type of fish, and then they had this excess fish, and they would put that in a different bucket, and then they would eat that excess fish. And he said, "Oh, are you eating it because you're getting paid to fish the other one?" They said, "Well, yes, but also because it's much tastier fish." He said, "Well, may I try it?" So they said, "Sure." So he tried it. He's like, "Oh my gosh, this is so much better than the fish you're getting paid to catch. What's it called?" And they said, "The bonefish." He said, "The bonefish? That's the worst name." He thought about it. He introduced it to restaurants here in the United States and Canada. It's now the number one selling fish in fancy restaurants. He renamed bonefish Chilean sea bass. What a great story. I love it. So that's what I would advise. I've had a couple of people, but even the people like that, I will just be honest about this, George, they'll use other people's stories, and it kind of makes them a little bit, really what they're lacking is a little bit of confidence on stage. Once they get used to storytelling, then they start revealing some of their stories.
And I'm glad you point that out, that if you're uncomfortable telling your own personal stories, you can pull a story from somewhere else, whether it's from a book, a movie, or from the news.
Great way to connect with the audience, because everybody, make sure it's something everybody would be familiar with. And if they're not, then you have to give them the background. But it's an excellent connection technique with the audience. And again, that's our goal, is Coach Jimmy and I, we take people through, again, former school teacher, what we call our 5 C's process. So first of all, before you write any of your speech, you need clarity. You need to know who your audience is and what's the problem that you solve. The next C is to connect. We already talked about in the first 5 minutes. You gotta rap. You gotta show that you're relatable, demonstrate your authority, and clearly demonstrate your purpose. And then the largest portion of your presentation is the content portion of your presentation. It's ironic because even though it's the longest part of your presentation, it's actually the least important because of the primacy and recency effect. Plenty of research shows that the bun's more important than the burger. People remember the beginning of your talk and the end of your talk, but they don't remember anything in between. But what I work on with clients is what they will remember is that you're helpful. And this is the amazing thing about psychology, George. It actually doesn't even matter if you're demonstrating expertise in your area. You just have to demonstrate to your audience that you're helpful. I'll give you an example. One of my mentors, he's no longer with us, was a guy by the name of Jim Trelease. And Jim, he used to talk to parents about how to read aloud to their kids. In the middle of his talk, he'd say, "Oh, wait a sec, folks. I'm going to share with you something that's going to save your life someday. If you ever lock yourself out of your car, but you have your cell phone, call up your significant other, have your significant other at home, put your car keys next to their phone. You put your phone next to your car door. It'll unlock the car door." George, I've tried this from 3,000 miles away, and it works. It doesn't work with every type of car. Like a Tesla, it wouldn't work. But the older cars that have, it's unbelievable to me. And here's the funny part of the story is people would come up to him 20 years later. They're like, "Oh my gosh, Jim, you're amazing. That happened to me." And what they are doing, "Oh, we got to hire you to speak. You were so helpful." That has nothing to do with his presentation whatsoever, but he's demonstrated that he's helpful. And this is the important point here. When you're on stage, and I know you believe in this too, George, whether people decide to take that next step with you or not, they've given you their most precious asset, their time. you have a responsibility to serve them. And I think what's the best speakers are doing is they're providing what I call a Home Depot approach. You can do it, we can help. And so you should provide your audience with one quick short-term win. This is something all of you can implement immediately, and you'll prosper. But then you need the we can help. You also have to show them a long-term victory, but they can't do it on their own. They need you to help them with that. And so I'm actually modeling that right now. I'm giving everybody what I take clients through on how to create a well-crafted story. But I've also already alluded to you that the problem is most people, they don't do it correctly after just being exposed to it one or two times. You need that ongoing coaching and support in order to help you. So that's the content portion of your presentation. And then the final two parts of your presentation are a clear call to action. And this is one of the biggest mistakes I see most people make is they don't give one clear call to action. I'll give an example from a podcast I was on the other day. At the end of the podcast, the hostess, she said, "Oh, I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Make sure you like, subscribe, and give us a 5-star review." When we went off air, I said, "You just asked your audience to do 3 things. They're not going to do any of them." Or I'll see it. I have to go to a lot of academic presentations and the person's like, "Oh, here's how you can connect with me. Here's my Facebook. Here's my YouTube channel. Here's my LinkedIn profile. Here's my email." Overwhelming. Again, former teacher, choices confuse and cause you to lose. One clear call to action. And then finally, you need an emotional close. And so the call to action and the close, they kind of run hand in hand because I always say that there's 2 types of people in your audience. I'm going to be stereotypical and say it's a married couple. The husband is the person I call the Joe Friday. He wants just the facts. He's the guy typically in your audience who's like, how much is this going to cost? How long does it take? What do I got to do? You need to be very clear about your call to action. What's the offer that I'm going to give that person? But if you just gear your presentation to that person, you're potentially eliminating 50% of your audience, which is the wife, which I call the Julia Roberts. Julia Roberts, she doesn't care what you're selling. She just wants to feel good. I really need to feel good. What makes me feel good? And a really well-crafted presentation, when you can make sure to appeal to both of those types of people, the Joe Fridays and the Julia Roberts in your audience, you'll have a lot higher rate of return of the people in your audience that convert to clients.
Powerful advice. And to demonstrate that people can get a free story guide at freestoryguide.com, and you can find that link in the description below. And that's the do it yourself, or you can also get help with that as well. And Danny, as we prepare to wrap up, imagine you're sitting down with a team leader, business team leader, who's giving a monthly meeting with the staff, and there's challenges on the horizon. What advice would you give to that person about the type of story that they might tell and how they deliver it?
Well, you're going to have to find a story that demonstrates how, first of all, you need to acknowledge that there's a problem. And second of all, you have to demonstrate how all of us can work together. When I was a kindergarten teacher, I used to always ask my kids, I'm like, what's more important, your arms or your legs? And they'd look at me dumbstruck. I'm like, here's a hint. They're both important. Translation, everybody on this team is important. Now, some of you are introverts, but you're incredible with the way you're writing code. And some of you are my outgoing people that love to talk to the customers or whatever. We need to figure out how all of us can utilize these strengths for the good of the order, for the benefit of the team. So that's what I would work on with and that's very typical. We have those types of challenges every day.
Powerful advice. My guest today is Danny Brassel, reminding you to leave people. If you like what you heard, tell your friends. And post your 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, because that helps more listeners find us. Come back every week for more practical insights to help you deliver your intended message. I'm your host, George Torok.